The woman who inflates her ego the most is usually the one who feels the most fragile inside. She doesn't realize it, but every loud display of superiority comes from a quiet fear she refuses to confront. Modern women today aren't born with oversized egos, they build them as armor. And the tragedy is this: the bigger the ego, the smaller the emotional stability behind it. The more she insists she's always right, the more terrified she is of being wrong. The more she demands validation, the less she believes she deserves it naturally. And the more she calls herself high value, the more disconnected she becomes from the reality of her own behavior. Her ego is not confidence. It's a carefully constructed illusion designed to hide insecurity, fear of inadequacy, and the uncomfortable truth that she no longer knows who she is without external praise. This is why the modern woman seems more inflated than generations before, because today's ego is not shaped by identity, but by comparison. Endless comparison, social media curated perfection, dopamine addiction, and the constant pressure to appear desirable have created a psychological environment where humility feels like weakness and self-awareness feels like a threat. The modern woman's ego grows from this pressure, not from inner strength. She has been told to never settle, to know her worth, to be the prize. And while these messages could have been healthy, they mutated into entitlement. Instead of developing emotional intelligence or self-awareness, she developed a shield, a mask, a persona built to tell the world she's untouchable, even when she is breaking inside. Look at her behavior. Body language reveals everything the ego tries to hide. The exaggerated confidence in her walk, the upward tilt of her chin, the dismissive tone, the way she interrupts to assert dominance. These are not signs of balance, but signals of insecurity. A woman who is truly centered does not need to perform confidence. A woman who is emotionally healthy does not need the world to bow to her value. But the modern woman, shaped by validation-driven culture, believes her ego is essential for survival. Her relationships suffer because of this. When a man offers genuine connection, she views it as weakness. When he shows empathy, she interprets it as an opportunity to gain power. When he gives patience and understanding, she believes she deserves more. Ego delusion blinds her. She can no longer differentiate between real value and the fantasy she has built in her mind. And this fantasy is why she pushes away the very men who could give her emotional safety, intimacy, and stability. She doesn't want a partner. She wants a mirror that reflects the superior version of herself she desperately wants to believe is real. The modern ego is built on emotional detachment, and detachment is mistaken for strength. She believes she's above vulnerability. She believes asking for help is degrading. She believes she must be unbreakable at all times. But the truth is, vulnerability is not weakness. It's what keeps relationships alive. Without vulnerability, a woman becomes rigid, cold, untouchable, and the man who tries to love her will feel like he's loving a wall. The ego delusion deepens because the world rewards it. Men chasing her feed it. Social platforms praising her feed it. Content that tells her she is perfect and men must adapt to her feeds it. And slowly, the line between confidence and self-deception disappears. She doesn't grow. She inflates. And inflation is not power, it is instability disguised as superiority. Her greatest fear is not losing men. Her greatest fear is losing the illusion of the woman she pretends to be. Because without that illusion, she must confront the parts of herself she has ignored for years. The insecurity, the fear of being ordinary, the fear of not being enough, and the fear that affection received without ego proves her mask was never necessary. The modern woman's ego is not a weapon, it is a cage. And the saddest part is that she locked herself inside without realizing she swallowed the key. The ego of the modern woman doesn't grow in silence. It grows in an environment where she is constantly told she deserves more, even when she has done nothing to earn it. This entitlement forms slowly, layered through years of emotional reinforcement, subtle validation, and cultural messaging that praises self-importance while ignoring self-awareness. Over time, she learns to believe that wanting something is the same as deserving it. She believes standards should rise endlessly, while responsibility should never touch her. And when everyone around her avoids challenging her, the ego begins to evolve into something more dangerous, a distorted sense of superiority. You can see this distortion clearly in the way she reacts to normal interpersonal friction. A simple disagreement feels like an attack. A request for accountability feels like disrespect. A suggestion for improvement feels like judgment. Instead of reflecting inward, she inflates outward. She adds more certainty, more stubbornness, more emotional distance, all to protect the fragile sense of identity hidden behind her ego. The more threatened she feels, the louder her self-importance becomes. The louder it becomes, the more disconnected she grows from the emotional reality of the people around her. Psychologically, ego delusion forms because she has been taught to value admiration over intimacy. True intimacy requires humility, vulnerability, and self-honesty, traits she has been conditioned to see as weaknesses. When a man tries to connect with her authentically, she instinctively pulls away, not because she doesn't want connection, but because connection requires revealing parts of herself she has avoided for years. So instead, she defaults to ego. Ego feels safer. Ego feels powerful. Ego keeps her from feeling inadequate. But ego also keeps her from being loved in a real, meaningful way. This ego-driven behavior becomes even more visible in relationships. She expects loyalty while offering minimal emotional effort. She expects understanding without providing clarity. She expects devotion without nurturing connection. In her mind, the man should adapt to her emotional world, but she rarely imagines adapting to his. When he communicates discomfort, she interprets it as criticism. When he tries to set boundaries, she frames it as control. When he withdraws to protect his sanity, she calls it emotional immaturity. Her ego won't let her consider that she might be part of the problem. And because the ego rejects accountability, she convinces herself she deserves better even when she hasn't contributed enough. Her emotional reactions become shaped by pride, not truth. Her tone carries defensiveness even when she believes she's being calm. Her body language shows superiority. Folded arms, raised eyebrows, dismissive gestures. Even when she says she wants peace. A modern woman with an inflated ego doesn't just project confidence. She projects hierarchy. She doesn't want a partner beside her. She wants a partner beneath her. And men feel this immediately through her energy, even if she never says it out loud. What makes this dynamic even more complex is that a woman with ego delusion doesn't typically recognize her behavior until the consequences become impossible to ignore. She only realizes something is wrong when men stop trying, when affection declines, when emotional intimacy disappears, when she finds herself surrounded by men who either tolerate her ego because they lack self-respect or walk away because they refuse to carry the weight of her superiority. But by the time this realization hits, the pattern is already deeply ingrained. And unless she faces the truth, the cycle continues. Blame, disappointment, emotional withdrawal, more ego. The tragedy is that beneath the ego lies a woman who desperately wants to be understood. She wants safety, respect, admiration, and emotional intimacy. But she has armored herself so tightly that she repels the very connection she seeks. She thinks being above everyone protects her. She thinks emotional distance makes her stronger. She thinks demanding more proves her value. But ego doesn't make her powerful. It isolates her. It separates her from genuine connection, honest communication, and the kind of love that doesn't need superiority to survive. She doesn't need more ego. She needs emotional grounding, self-awareness, and the courage to let someone see her without the mask she's been wearing for years. If you've ever seen this pattern in real life, comment "She hides fear behind ego." The ego of the modern woman becomes most visible when she interacts with men who treat her well. A man who offers patience, stability, and emotional safety unintentionally becomes the mirror she can't stand to look into. His kindness exposes her defensiveness. His calm exposes her volatility. His maturity exposes the parts of herself she has never developed. And instead of appreciating his emotional depth, she uses ego as a shield to avoid feeling inferior. She believes that if she stays on top, emotionally, verbally, psychologically, she will never have to face the fear that she is not as strong as she pretends to be. Deep inside, she feels a constant tension, the desire to be admired and the fear of being truly known. Genuine connection requires authenticity, and authenticity is the one thing her ego cannot tolerate. So she projects superiority. She blames instead of reflects. She escalates instead of listening. She dominates conversations instead of engaging with them. All of this reinforces what she wants the world to believe, that she is unshakable. But internally, every act of inflated pride only deepens her emotional instability. Men often interpret this as rudeness or arrogance, but the psychology behind it is more complex. Ego delusion grows when a woman is unable to accept that vulnerability is part of emotional maturity. She believes being soft makes her weak. She believes adjusting herself for a relationship makes her lose power. She believes admitting fault makes her lose status. And because she cannot confront these fears, she builds personality traits that protect her from them. Traits like stubbornness, dominance, and a resistance to introspection. These traits look like strength, but they are actually symptoms of emotional insecurity disguised as self-confidence. The more insecure she becomes, the more aggressively she asserts her superiority. You can see it in her tone when she speaks to her partner. Sharp, dismissive, corrective. You can see it in the way she handles disagreement, not with curiosity, but with defensiveness. You can see it in the way she uses emotional withdrawal as punishment, not communication. These are not signs of a stable identity. These are signs of someone desperately trying to maintain control of a story she doesn't fully understand. Over time, this ego begins to sabotage her relationships. A man who tries to support her starts feeling like he is walking on eggshells. Every word becomes a risk. Every suggestion becomes a threat. Every attempt at closeness becomes a battlefield. He gives reassurance, but she interprets it as weakness. He gives effort, but she sees it as obligation. He gives emotional presence, but she uses it as leverage. His value becomes invisible to her because her ego refuses to acknowledge that someone else could be emotionally stronger than she is. And when he eventually withdraws, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion, she interprets his silence as disrespect rather than a signal that her behavior is pushing him away. Her ego never considers the possibility that she is part of the conflict. Ego delusion rewrites the narrative to protect her image. He is the problem, he is not enough, he changed. Anything to avoid confronting herself. This is the psychological trap that keeps her stuck. Ego provides temporary comfort but long-term suffering. It makes her feel powerful in the moment, but powerless in relationships. It gives her the illusion of control, but destroys her ability to form emotional intimacy. And deep inside, even if she never says it out loud, she feels a quiet loneliness that grows stronger the more she clings to superiority. Ego doesn't protect her from pain, it isolates her from love. The truth is simple. Behind every modern woman with inflated ego lies a girl who was never taught that true strength comes from emotional humility. She learned to be loud when she should have learned to be honest. She learned to be dominant when she should have learned to be self-aware. She learned to protect herself from vulnerability instead of embracing it. And because of that, her ego becomes a wall she hides behind, not a foundation she stands on. And the saddest part is this: the more she tries to convince the world she doesn't need anyone, the more she proves she actually does. The most revealing part of the modern woman's ego delusion appears when the world stops validating her. For years, she has been surrounded by people who tell her she's extraordinary, attractive, powerful, irreplaceable. Social platforms affirm it. Friends reinforce it. Dating culture rewards it. Men chasing her inflate it. But ego built on external validation has a predictable weakness. The moment the validation slows, the ego cracks. And when those cracks appear, she doesn't become softer. She becomes harsher. She becomes more defensive, more dismissive, more unwilling to admit that something inside her is shifting. Her identity has been constructed around being desired, admired, and praised. So when attention declines even slightly, her mind interprets it as a threat. Not a normal change, not a natural phase of life. A threat to her self-worth. A threat to the image she has built. A threat to the superiority she relies on. The modern woman's ego delusion doesn't emerge overnight. It forms slowly, shaped by cultural praise, emotional fear, and an identity built more on projection than truth. And while this ego can make her appear bold, confident, untouchable, the reality is far more fragile. Beneath the armor is someone who has never learned how to feel safe without power, how to feel loved without control, or how to feel valuable without external validation. Her ego gives her strength, but it takes away something even more important: emotional connection. You see this most clearly when she finds herself in moments of quiet, when there is no audience, no man chasing her, no attention to fuel her self-importance. In that silence, the ego has nothing to feed on. And that's when the truth surfaces, the truth she has been avoiding for years, the truth that she is afraid of not being enough, the truth that she is afraid of being seen without the persona she shows the world, the truth that the superiority she projects is not confidence, but protection. This inner conflict follows her into relationships. Her partner might try to understand her, support her, and love her through the emotional layers she carries. But love cannot reach someone who keeps their guard raised. She wants intimacy, but she fears what intimacy requires. She wants respect, but she struggles to give it. She wants partnership, but she prefers control. And even when she meets a good man, a patient man, a grounded man, she often pushes him away out of instinct rather than intention. These men don't leave because they lack loyalty. They leave because their emotional health begins to deteriorate under the weight of her ego. No one can stay in a relationship where every conversation feels like a test, where affection is conditional, where vulnerability is punished, or where the smallest disagreement is treated like betrayal. Emotional imbalance is not a burden love can carry forever. And when he finally walks away, quietly, respectfully, without bitterness, it becomes the first moment she is forced to confront the reality she has avoided. He didn't leave because he was weak. He left because she refused to be soft. This realization hits harder than any argument ever could. It forces her to see how her ego has shaped her life, not by protecting her, but by isolating her. It has pushed away the men who might have given her the emotional security she secretly craves. It has created patterns of connection built on power instead of trust. And it has trapped her in a cycle where she becomes harder every time she feels hurt, not realizing that each layer of hardness makes true intimacy further out of reach. But there is also hope in this awareness. Ego delusion is not permanent, can be unlearned, can be softened, can be reshaped into something healthier, something grounded, something real. The path forward begins with humility, the willingness to see oneself honestly, without defensiveness, without blame, without the need to win every emotional exchange. Humility doesn't make her weak. It makes her free, free to love, free to be loved, free to build a relationship that doesn't depend on superiority, but on understanding. A woman who learns this becomes peaceful instead of reactive, connected instead of guarded, emotionally grounded instead of emotionally dependent on validation. And the man who loves her will feel the difference immediately, not because she becomes perfect, but because she becomes present. Present enough to listen, present enough to soften, present enough to let love exist without turning it into a battlefield. If she ever reaches this point, she will finally understand the truth her ego has been hiding from her. She didn't need to be above anyone to be worthy. She only needed to be honest enough to be seen. Thank you for listening to this story in the deep in brain style. If this message resonates with you, feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, or share it with someone who might need to hear it today.